The cold streets of Baltimore showed no mercy to anyone, especially in the impoverished areas where Gervonta Davis grew up. Winter was approaching, bringing with it a cutting wind that seemed to penetrate to the bones of those who had to face the streets daily. In this hostile setting, young Gervonta, now a recognized world boxing champion, drove his luxury car through the streets that witnessed his birth, a rare visit to reconnect with his roots. It was difficult for Gervonta not to remember his challenging childhood as he passed familiar corners, deteriorated buildings, and parks where he used to play. Each street told a story. Each neighborhood held memories, some too painful to revisit. The boxer adjusted the car's heater while observing people walking hurriedly, hunched in their coats, trying to protect themselves from the merciless cold that plagued the city. The trip had no specific purpose beyond keeping his feet on the ground, something his trainer Calvin Ford always insisted was important. "Never forget where you came from," he would say, and Gervonta took this advice seriously. Success came quickly for the fighter known as Tank, but he knew better than anyone how life could change in an instant, how fortune could be as volatile as Maryland's weather. While driving down North Avenue, a solitary figure on the sidewalk caught his attention. A middle-aged man wearing a worn coat that seemed inadequate for the intense cold was standing at the corner with a small styrofoam box. Something about that silhouette awakened a distant memory in Gervonta, a familiar feeling he couldn't fully identify. The fighter slowed down, trying to understand why that man seemed so familiar. It was when the man turned slightly that Gervonta felt a shock of recognition course through his body. That face, although more aged and weathered by time, belonged to someone who had been fundamental in his life long before Calvin Ford appeared. It was Mr. Harrison, his elementary school math teacher, the man who years ago had believed in a troubled boy when no one else did. Without thinking twice, Gervonta pulled over, his heart racing with the same intensity as before a fight. Mr. Michael Harrison was selling homemade candies, individually wrapped chocolates and caramels that he tried to offer to passers-by with a tired smile. His hands were red and cracked from the cold, holding small, colorful packages. The contrast was so stark that for a moment, Gervonta remained frozen inside the car, observing the scene with a mixture of shock and sadness. Memories flooded the boxer's mind. Mr. Harrison had been more than a teacher. He was the first person who truly noticed Gervonta's academic potential, not just his aggression. While other teachers labeled him as problematic, Harrison spent extra time after class, patiently explaining math problems, teaching Gervonta to channel his frustration into concentration. "You have the same capacity as any other student in this school," he used to say, words that stayed with Gervonta long after leaving those classrooms. The difference between that confident and inspiring man and the solitary figure on the sidewalk was devastating. Mr. Harrison always wore well-pressed shirts and colorful ties that made the children smile. Now his coat was torn at the elbows, and his posture, once erect and confident, was curved as if carrying an invisible weight. What could have happened to reduce that beacon of hope to a street vendor on a freezing winter day? Gervonta finally gathered the courage to get out of the car. The cold air hit his face as he walked toward his former teacher, uncertain if he would be recognized. After all, he was just one among hundreds of students who had passed through Mr. Harrison's hands over the years. And now Gervonta was a different man, no longer the skinny, angry boy who sat in the back row, drawing boxing gloves in the margins of his math notebook. As he approached, Gervonta noticed details that weren't visible from afar. A wedding ring still adorned Mr. Harrison's finger, though worn by time. He still had an old Westport Elementary School badge pinned to his coat, like someone carrying a last pride from the profession he loved. And his eyes, despite the evident tiredness, still maintained that gleam of kindness that Gervonta remembered so well. It was that look that had made a scared boy from Baltimore believe he could be more than his environment predetermined. "Mr. Harrison?" Gervonta's voice came out lower than intended, almost swallowed by the noise of traffic and wind. The older man looked up, initially with the polite but distant expression he reserved for potential customers. Then something changed in his gaze, a spark of recognition that slowly transformed into astonishment. His lips moved silently, forming a name he hadn't pronounced in years. "Gervonta? Little Gervonta Davis?" Mr. Harrison let out, his voice trembling slightly. He blinked several times as if not believing what his eyes were seeing. The boxer nodded, suddenly feeling like that 11-year-old boy again. For a moment, both stood still, separated by more than a decade of life and experiences, united by memories of a classroom where a teacher refused to give up on a difficult student. It was Mr. Harrison who broke the silence, his voice gaining strength with the certainty of recognition. "My God, it's really you. I've been following your career whenever I can. That knockout against Martinez was incredible." The genuine enthusiasm in his voice made something tighten in Gervonta's chest. Even reduced to selling candy on the street, Harrison still remembered him, still cared about his success. The irony didn't go unnoticed. The man who had helped shape his future was now struggling in the present, while Gervonta reaped the benefits of those early investments in his potential. The conversation flowed hesitantly at first, navigating through years of absence. Gervonta discovered that Mr. Harrison had taught for 15 more years after his time at school, inspiring generations of children in Baltimore, until an administrative restructuring and budget cuts left him jobless at 62. "My contract wasn't renewed during the cost containment program," he explained with a resigned smile. "Too experienced for the current budget, too young to retire completely." His wife Martha had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 2 years earlier, and medical costs quickly consumed their savings. Selling homemade candies made by Martha was a way to supplement the insufficient income they received. As they talked, people passed by hurriedly, some casting curious glances at the famous boxer talking with a street vendor. Gervonta barely noticed, completely absorbed in Mr. Harrison's words, who spoke without self-pity, with the same dignity that Gervonta remembered from his classes. "Life is like math, Gervonta," he said at one point. "Sometimes you need to work with the numbers you have, not with the ones you'd like to have." The simple wisdom hit Gervonta deeply, making him realize that despite the circumstances, his former teacher was still the same man who had inspired him years ago. Seated in a nearby diner, sheltered from the cutting cold, Gervonta bought coffee for both while Mr. Harrison shared the details of his life in recent years. The story was painfully common among American educators, decades of dedication rewarded with financial insecurity. After 32 years of teaching, Baltimore's school system had implemented a cost reduction program that prioritized younger teachers with more recent training and lower starting salaries. Harrison, along with dozens of other veteran educators, was informed that his profile didn't align with the new direction of the school district, a euphemism for disguised dismissal. "Martha and I were preparing for our retirement, you know. We had plans," Harrison explained, holding the coffee, cup with both hands to warm them. "We wanted to visit the Grand Canyon, meet our grandchildren in Seattle. Simple things." His gaze momentarily lost itself in memories of postponed dreams. Then came Martha's diagnosis, and suddenly our financial planning wasn't enough anymore. The medications, the therapies, you can't imagine how quickly the healthcare system can drain someone. Gervonta listened in silence, a knot forming in his throat. He knew this reality well. He had grown up seeing his own family struggle against a system that seemed designed to keep people in cycles of poverty. The difference was that he had found a way out through boxing, a talent that catapulted him out of that cycle. But what about those who dedicated their lives to helping others like Mr. Harrison? What escape did they have when the system discarded them? "I started looking for work in private schools, educational institutes, even community centers," Harrison continued. "But I always heard the same thing. We're looking for someone younger. We need people who master the new educational technologies." He gave a sad smile. "Ironically, I was the one who implemented the first computer lab at Westport back in the 90s, but that didn't matter anymore." The injustice was palpable, and Gervonta felt a familiar anger growing inside him, the same anger that years ago Mr. Harrison had taught him to transform into determination. Martha, despite her condition, had started making homemade candies, using family recipes. At first, it was just a hobby to keep her busy on good days, when pain and fatigue gave her a break. Neighbors began ordering for parties and events, and soon Harrison realized it could be a source of income. "On days when she can't get out of bed, I'm the one who makes deliveries and sales. On good days, we work together." The dignity with which they faced their challenges deeply touched Gervonta. There was no self-pity there, just the same resilience that Harrison had tried to instill in his students over the years. During the following weeks, Gervonta couldn't get Mr. Harrison out of his thoughts. Between training sessions and business commitments, he found himself recalling that conversation in the diner, the contrast between the luxury of his own life and the daily struggle of his former teacher. An idea began to form in his mind, not as a gesture of charity. He knew Mr. Harrison was too proud to accept that, but as a form of recognition, a way to honor the impact that man had on his life. Gervonta began researching small artisanal candy businesses, consulting experts in gastronomy and marketing. He discovered there was a growing market for artisanal products with authentic stories behind them. Martha Harrison's candies weren't just delicious, they carried decades of family tradition and now a story of perseverance in the face of adversity. It was something that resonated with people, something that could be transformed into a viable business with the right investment and visibility. With the help of his management team, Gervonta developed a detailed plan. First, find a small commercial space in the neighborhood where the Harrisons lived, transforming it into a cozy candy store. Then create a visual identity that would honor the couple's history and their connection to education, something like Martha's Sweet Lessons or Dulce's Saberes. Finally, use his own platform and influence to give visibility to the business, sharing the genuine story of his former teacher with his millions of followers. What concerned Gervonta most was how to present the idea to Mr. Harrison. Knowing his pride and independence, he knew that a wrong approach could be interpreted as pity or worse, as an attempt to save someone who didn't ask to be saved. He wanted it to be a genuine partnership, something that would give Mr. Harrison and his wife back control over their lives, the dignity of working on something of their own, not just surviving by selling candy on freezing corners. After days of reflection, Gervonta finally called the number Mr. Harrison had given him, inviting the couple to dinner at his home. He carefully prepared his speech, mentally rehearsing how he would explain that this wasn't charity, but recognition for everything Harrison had done for him when no one else believed in his potential. It was time to give back, not with handouts, but with opportunity, the same thing Mr. Harrison had given him so many years ago. Gervonta's house in Baltimore's upscale areas was spacious and elegant, but he made an effort to make it welcoming for the Harrisons' visit. Martha arrived in a wheelchair, pushed by her husband, her face marked by years and disease but illuminated by a warm smile that immediately made Gervonta understand why Mr. Harrison fought so hard for her. There was a silent dignity in the couple that contrasted with the opulence of the environment, reminding Gervonta of values that money couldn't buy. During dinner, prepared by a private chef, Martha animatedly shared stories about how she had learned to make candy from her grandmother, a woman who had survived the Great Depression by selling homemade caramels. She always said that candies are small moments of happiness that you can give to people, even in the hardest times, explained Martha, her eyes shining with memories. Gervonta observed how Mr. Harrison looked at his wife with unwavering admiration and love. Despite all the difficulties they faced, the conversation flowed naturally, covering decades of shared and separate experiences. Gervonta talked about how Mr. Harrison's math lessons had unexpectedly translated into boxing, the importance of precision, timing, understanding angles and distances. "You taught me to think before acting, to find solutions instead of just reacting to problems," admitted Gervonta. "Calvin Ford turned me into a fighter, but you planted the seeds long before." The words visibly touched the former teacher, whose eyes momentarily moistened. It was only after dessert, ironically one of the homemade candies that Martha had insisted on bringing, that Gervonta finally gathered the courage to present his proposal. Carefully, he explained his vision for a small artisanal candy store, a business that would capitalize not only on Martha's traditional recipes, but also on the couple's story, a dedicated teacher and his resilient wife, creating moments of sweetness in an often bitter world. He emphasized that it would be a partnership, not charity. an investment in people who had invested in so many others throughout their lives. The initial reaction was silence. Martha looked at her husband, a silent communication passing between them, decades of companionship, allowing them to understand each other without words. It was she who spoke first, her voice soft but firm. "You know, Gervonta, Michael has told me about you over the years. About the boy with so much anger and so much potential." She smiled gently. "He always believed you would do something extraordinary one day, but I think he never imagined that this something extraordinary would be for us." Mr. Harrison remained silent, but Gervonta could see the emotion in his eyes, the conflict between pride and need, between independence and acceptance of help. "I can't accept this, Gervonta," Mr. Harrison finally spoke, his voice firm despite the evident emotion. "It's too generous. I didn't do anything to deserve such an investment." His hands, the same ones that had guided countless children through the mysteries of mathematics, were now closed in tense fists on the table. Gervonta recognized the pride in that posture, the same pride that had prevented him from accepting help many times in his own life, often to his own detriment. Martha gently placed her hand over her husband's. "Michael, perhaps we should at least consider it." She looked at Gervonta with perceptive eyes. "But I need to understand better. Are you proposing to be our investor? Partner? What exactly would be your role in this business?" The question was astute, revealing the practical intelligence that complemented her husband's academic idealism. Gervonta smiled, appreciating the direct approach. "I'm thinking of being a silent investor," explained Gervonta. "I would provide the initial capital for the space, equipment, basic marketing. I would help with my platform to give visibility to the business at the beginning. But the operation, the daily decisions, the vision, all of that would be yours." He paused, carefully choosing his next words. "Mr. Harrison, you gave me something much more valuable than money when I was a child. You gave me time, attention, the belief that I could be more than my environment suggested. That's priceless. I'm not trying to pay back a debt. That would be impossible. I'm offering an opportunity, just as you offered one to me." The silence that followed was profound, loaded with unspoken emotions. Martha squeezed her husband's hand, that simple gesture communicating decades of mutual understanding. "Michael," she said softly, "we've spent our lives helping others build their futures. Maybe it's time to allow someone to help us with ours." There was a wisdom in her words that struck both Gervonta and Mr. Harrison. The former teacher looked at his wife, then at his ex-student, now a successful man sitting in his own mansion. "It will be a private mutual agreement, Gervonta," Mr. Harrison finally declared, his voice finding firmness. "Let's make it a formalized investment, but under our terms, and we would need to be the majority owners." His conditions revealed the meticulous educator he had always been, someone who valued clarity and justice above all. Gervonta couldn't help but smile. Even accepting help, Harrison maintained his dignity and autonomy. It was precisely why Gervonta respected him so much. "We can work with those terms," agreed Gervonta, extending his hand. The handshake that followed sealed more than a business agreement. It was a full circle, a recognition of how small acts of faith can reverberate through the years, returning in unexpected ways. As Martha discreetly wiped away a tear, Gervonta realized he was doing more than helping his former teacher. He was honoring a legacy of kindness and belief in human potential that he hoped to one day pass forward, just as it had been passed to him. 6 months later, on a sunny spring afternoon, a small crowd gathered for the official opening of Martha's Sweet Lessons in Baltimore's Hampton neighborhood. The store, with its light blue facade and carefully hand-painted golden letters, emanated a welcoming charm that immediately attracted passers-by. Inside, dark wooden shelves displayed boxes of artisanal candies, each containing a small note about the recipe's history or an inspiring reflection, an educational touch that Mr. Harrison had insisted on including. The transformation of the Harrisons in recent months was remarkable. Mr. Harrison, now impeccably dressed in a dress shirt and bow tie that had become his trademark in the store, moved through the space with renewed energy, explaining to customers the origin of each candy with the same enthusiasm he used to reserve for mathematical equations. Martha, benefiting from better medical care they could now afford, supervised production from a chair specially adapted for her in the small kitchen, visible to customers, her smile lighting up the environment. Gervonta observed the scene from a discreet corner, dressed casually so as not to divert attention from the true protagonist of the day. As promised, his involvement had been mostly behind the scenes, helping with the business plan, connecting the Harrisons with reliable suppliers, and occasionally mentioning the candies on his social media. The initial success of the store, however, came from the quality of the products and the authentic story behind them, not from his celebrity. This was exactly how he wanted it to be. The most emotional moment of the afternoon came when Mr. Harrison gathered everyone for a brief speech. "Education and candy have more in common than you might imagine," he said, his voice clear and confident as in the days when he commanded a classroom. "Both nourish in different ways, both bring joy when made with dedication, and both have the power to transform ordinary moments into special memories." He paused, looking for Gervonta in the crowd before continuing, "And both remind us that we never really know the impact our actions will have in the future. A lesson taught today may return as an unexpected blessing tomorrow." Later, when most guests had left and only a few customers were browsing the store, Gervonta approached the counter, where Mr. Harrison was meticulously organizing a display of caramels. "You look happy," observed the boxer. Harrison smiled, his gaze turning to Martha, who was laughing while explaining the chocolate tempering process to a young customer. "We are happy," he corrected, "not just because of the business, although that's wonderful, but because we've regained our purpose." Martha always said that making candy was her way of spreading joy, and somehow it has allowed me to continue being a teacher. Each box that leaves here carries a bit of knowledge with it. As Gervonta left the store, he felt a deep satisfaction that rivaled any victory in the ring. He hadn't created any grandiose foundation or exaggerated project, just facilitated a genuine connection between a life's work and a new opportunity. On the sidewalk in front of the store, he observed for a moment the discreet plaque near the entrance. "Every great moment begins with a small lesson." It was a truth that Mr. Harrison had taught him long ago in a classroom in Baltimore, and that he now continued to teach others, not just through numbers, but through the restored sweetness of a life with renewed purpose. If you like this story, leave a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next stories.